All right, so we're going to start today with a recap of the last lecture last month. So one of the things I said was, the first three lectures this year, the first one was on identity, which, as we discussed, is the foundational question. And the foundational topic around which every other topic in our life revolves around. Like once you fix the identity question, everything else gets easier. Purpose, career, money, relationships, everything gets easier once we dig into that well and we get things right. But the first three lectures this year, you can think of it as a trilogy, right? We started with identity, and in that lecture, what we tried to do was drill down and understand the sources of identity, historically, like what has that looked like? How have we derived identity and meaning as people? And one of the things we established was, and also, when we talked about career, was that our conception of identity as we know and understand it today is not something we've done for a very long time. So if you're struggling with your identity, it's not exactly a fault. It doesn't necessarily mean that something is wrong with you. Although something might be wrong with you, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It is because our current articulation of identity as a means to attain fulfillment and self-actualization is only one that we've really come to grapple with in the past 200 years or so. And as a species, we've been around for 3.5 billion years. So in the grand scheme of things, we're only just getting started. And all of us are sort of guinea pigs in that experiment. And, we hope that some of the lessons that we learn, and in keeping with what we talk about a lot, what sort of ancestors do we want to be? We hope that these are questions that we can come to terms with through the experience of our own lives, come to answers that we can pass down. One of the things we talked about in the first lecture in January when we discussed identity was the concept of inheritance and what exactly constitutes meaningful inheritance. Is it a trust fund? That's nice, and I wish that on everyone, but at best, a trust fund is a gift that's given to people, and inheritances are cognitive, moral, and spiritual, tangible bequests that are passed down from generation to generation. So for us, that question is, what are we going to be passing down to people who come after us? And so this three-part series, the first three lectures, on identity, on career, and today on purpose is going to help us dig a little deep into that. Last month, we talked about career. We established the purpose of a career. It's not about money. It's not about status. Those things are nice and very important, but that's not what it's about. We're able to establish that the purpose of a career is the transformation of the individual. So if you're in a job or you're trying to get into a job, it can't just be about the money. And I understand there's practical concerns for, how to pay our bills, how to pay our rent, and how to stay afloat. That's great, but that can't be all we think about when we think about what we are doing with the most productive years of our lives. And it even is put into better perspective when we understand that most people here, you're in your 20s. Your 20s and your 30s are the most foundational years of your life. And what you spend your 20s and 30s doing, forms the foundations for what the rest of your life, the patterns the rest of your life, takes. So sometimes, yes, there are stories of people whose life gets started at 40. That's true and that's acceptable. That's not usually the norm. But even in those cases, the habits that lead them to starting their lives and the success they experience much later in life, these are habits that were built and consolidated in their 20s and 30s. The only difference is they probably didn't see much success very early on. And you don't have to, that's not the point. The point is you don't have to see much success in your 20s and 30s. But based off of the way we're making decisions about our career, based off of the way we're making decisions about what we're doing with the most productive years of our lives, what sort of futures are we going to have and what are we going to pass down to those who come after us? One of the things we also did was distinguish between a career and a job, and we established that a lot of people have jobs and many people never get to have a career because a job is contractually something you do in exchange for money. But a career is meaning infused into a job where you take a much more long-term perspective. One of the examples we gave was if you're a receptionist and you grudgingly wake up every morning and go to work and sit down and you're really annoying on the phone, or you're annoyed when customers call you and you have to deal with them. And we've all dealt with people like that. Some of those people are even our parents, and you think about it as how much am I getting paid from this job in the first place anyways. But there's someone exactly doing the exact same job who thinks of it as, I'm learning how to build my skills in communication. I'm learning how to build relationships with people that when someone walks in the door, I can tell if they're having a bad day or a good day. And I know exactly what to say to them. I'm learning how to build communication skills. I'm learning how to build skills that allow me pay attention to detail. And these are incredibly transferable skills. And over time, I can use these to do very many other things in the future. That's the difference between someone who thinks about their career as a career, versus their job as a job and something that they do in exchange for money. One thing that I did not say that I've had time to think about is you would never get wealthy from a job. A job would never give you wealth because wealth is not built by hard work. Wealth is not built by exchanging your hours for money. And I'm not saying we should not do that, by the way. But wealth is built by much more long-term thinking. Taking an industry, developing perspective in it, developing skills in that particular line of work that hones that perspective you have, and then deploying people, resources, capital you have at it. That's how people create outsized returns. So when you think about the biggest billionaires who we admire, they are not necessarily smarter than any of you in this room, quite honestly, right? But what do they have that we don't have? They have opinions, they have thoughts. They are decisive, they never stop being decisive. They are also willing to look foolish early, and most of us aren't willing to be that. We just want to be finished on day one. And that's a very fundamental difference between people who go on to be successful, really successful in the long term, and people who don't. You're smart enough. You're smart enough, like you're smart enough to take that first step. But maybe what we're lacking is courage. Maybe what we're lacking is the mindset that whatever it is we're doing, we need to be taking a long-term bet. And if it's a 50-year bet, there's no way you expect that on day one or year 5 or year 10, you have all the results you're supposed to, and then you start to get discouraged. Those were some of the things we talked about. We also talked about what makes a great career, and we established 5 things. The first of them is meaning. So when you're in a career, it needs to imbue you with meaning. You need to feel like what you're doing is making a positive dent in the lives of other people and also in your life, because when you're building a career, it is, yes, you're impacting other people, but the most significant person who is impacted in the course of a career is you. So you should feel like it's doing that for you. The next is learning. We established, the fulfillment criteria for a career from the perspective of, Lev Vygotsky, a Russian psychologist who proposed what he called the zone of proximal development. And the zone of proximal development, and your careers must fulfill you with this, is when you're in a career, you should be in a place where you're pulled out of your comfort zone, but you're not thrown too far out into the wild that you will just die. So you have enough scaffolding, which is a term that he came up with. You have enough scaffolding in form of mentors, in form of people who support you. In form of people who support you. And that allows you to be your best self. So the zone of proximal development is that fine place between what you know and are very comfortable doing. If you're really good at preparing reports, for example, but really bad at giving presentations, those are two extremes. The zone of proximal development is right at the middle, where maybe you're asked to lead the stand-up in your team that morning, right? You've prepared a report, and beyond just preparing it and giving it to someone else to do, you're guided and asked to do it and provided with help. That's exactly what a career should provide. And, an ideal career should leave us in the zone of proximal development for the rest of our lives. The next thing we talked about was, of course, earning, the capacity for economic prosperity, because there are levels of self-fulfillment that you would never be able to attain without economic prosperity. The fourth thing that a career must fulfill, as we discussed last week, is legacy. So legacy is the quality of leaving behind things of permanence. So whether you're in an organization and you build a process flow that it's embedded in the entire organization, that the entire organization gets to use even after you've left. That's legacy. Legacy is something as simple as that. It could be building businesses, it's ideas, it is articles, it is books, that last a long time, that outlast you. Something that is built with enough systems and structures that do not need you, do not rely on your presence for them to thrive and to yield value to people. And a career must provide you with the ability to build things of legacy. That's probably the most noble thing that's out there. And finally, of course, personal fulfillment, needs to keep you in a state of flow as many times as possible. Something we'll talk about, today in purpose. So today we're going to be continuing that conversation by talking about purpose. People also refer to purpose as meaning, and when you're orienting yourself in the world, you have to make a set of decisions, and by making decisions, there are other decisions that you are actively not making. So, for example, and that's the way our brains work biologically. If I walk to this side of the room and lift my hand, I've decided that making that leap to this side of the room and lifting my hand is better than anything else that I could be doing. You all are here this morning. You've made a decision that being here is better than anything else you possibly could be doing. So what that means is there's some sort of hierarchy of values. There's a structure of values, and you've decided what's most important to you. That's exactly the foundational constituent element of purpose. It's you deciding what's most important to me, what's most important for my future. And so there are two questions that tend to arise. It is, what happens if we don't construct an aim for ourselves in our lives? And the second question is, what happens if we actually do construct an aim for ourselves? And we're going to dive into that just a little bit today, to discuss that. There's in popular culture, on social media, there's this notion that as humans, we're merely, especially as young people, we're merely pleasure-seeking people. So you see things like, oh, I just want to be happy. That's not why we exist. That's not a strong enough purpose. It's not compelling enough to get us out of bed. And I think we all know this and we all recognize this. And so maybe it's time for us to get serious. Like, let's face this head on and give it everything we can. Being happy is not enough, and that's important. And I wish that on each and every one of us. But there's things that are more complex when it comes to us, confronting our destinies and confronting life. We need a hierarchy of values to make sense of the world. And that's where purpose comes to being. What is that thing for which everything else is subject to? What is that ultimate North Star around which your life and the organization of your goals exist? And what's interesting is, as humans, our perceptions are organized in line with our aims, in line with our purpose. And there's an American computer scientist, philosopher, and psychologist. His name is Norbert Wiener. He came up with this concept known as cybernetics, and a cybernetic model of human purpose. And very simply, one of the things that he realized was that in machines and in humans alike, that our emotions participate in a constant feedback loop of perception, of interpretation, of action, and of feedback. So what that means is, when you have a specific aim, if you're trying to buy a computer, for example, if you walk into this room, you probably would see nothing else but computers. If you're on the market for a car, when you go out into the street, there's nothing else that you see but cars. When you see people, all you see is like, what car key do you have in your hand? And have we all experienced this? We probably have experienced this, and that's exactly how, like, our bodies have, our neurological architecture rewards us, is constructed in a way that whatever it is that we prioritize from a purpose point of view, whatever aims we have, everything around us, we literally start to see just those things. So we may think that our senses are objective. Oh, like I look here and I see a black wall. Our senses aren't as objective. They're incredibly subjective, and they're dependent on our purpose. And that's both good and bad. It's bad in the sense that, well, if you want something and it's not good for you, you're going to stop at nothing to justify your desire for that thing, because that's literally all your senses can see. But we can weaponize that in a way that's powerful. When we set a goal for ourselves, when we set an ultimate goal for ourselves, that everything we have, we have all of our senses, we deploy that deeply, to help us achieve that goal, no matter how long it takes. Our bodies are wired that way. Our brains are wired that way. And a lot of times, it's our minds that have to, that has to catch up. That's exactly how, we react. So the reason why I find this fascinating is because, our purpose and the human instinct for purpose is fundamentally built into our neurological architecture. So what that means is we're purpose-seeking beings. We can't fully, even from a biological perspective, we can't fully self-actualize without a purpose. So how do we find a purpose? We're going to get into, like some of those sources of purpose. Friedrich Nietzsche, like the German existentialist who, proclaimed God is dead. We have to invent our own values to survive the death of God. People like that belong in that camp of people who believe there's nothing fundamentally intrinsic to us as humans that gives us purpose, and we have to invent it. The reason why we have to invent it is to push back against the existential dread that comes with being alive. But then there's people, on the other side, and I think all of you, or most of you in this room, belong there, that believe that all of us as humans are created with an intent and purpose, and there's specific problems that we're meant to solve with our lives. But on this, purpose is not something necessarily that you invent for yourself, as opposed to what folks like Friedrich Nietzsche thought. It is something you discover, like when an archaeologist digs, tills the soil and excavates to find things. That's exactly, it's a similar process through which we discover what our purpose is. But many people, way more people than not, live and die without figuring out what their purpose is, without figuring out a specific use that they play in the world, that makes the world a better place, that leaves the world better than they left it. But what if that was all of us? Like, what if all 8 billion people lived with the consciousness that there's a reason why I'm here? Forget about 8 billion people. What if all of us in this room lived with that consciousness and believed it? Because one thing that tends to happen is we never tend to believe it until we stumble upon it. So sometimes we're lucky and we stumble upon purpose, or what seems like it, and we're like, oh, I've always known this has always been my purpose. But what if before we had proof for it, we deeply believe that? We deeply believe that we might not be there yet, we may not have found it, but that there's something to be found. What are those consecrations? How do you connect yourself with the divine through those consecrations? The second is sacrifice, and we've talked about this. Like the most significant sort of sacrifice you could make as a young person is sacrificing the present for the future. If you believe that the life that you have leads towards a purposed end that is good, there's almost nothing you would not sacrifice on that altar. So sacrifice as a principle is one of the most sophisticated ways of amassing strength, and courage that's needed, to undergo that purpose of that journey of purpose definition. So divine assignment is the most profound way, for us to identify what our purpose is. But the second thing is, because a lot of times, especially if you're inclined to be a person of faith, there's a lot that we chalk up to the divine. We are willing to say we'll wait and we'll fold our arms until we get divine revelation, but that's not how it works. It would not meet you in your bedroom when you've isolated yourself and cut yourself off from the world and are doing nothing, and not building any skill. You're not in touch with any needs out in your community. The second place is to actually find out by looking around you, what are the needs in today's day and age that would be best served by me? And you can even remove yourself from the equation, but what are the problems that exist out there that need someone to solve for them? And that's usually a very good way to think about problems and what to solve. It's like, if someone solved this problem, like, the world will be better, my community will be better, my family will be better, my life will be better if someone solved this. Like, there is an endless array of such problems, such needs that exist in our communities, especially if you come from a place like, Nigeria, where we do, and, there's so many things that could be done to actually make it better. So it's there for you to, come up with a list of, look, what are all those things? And what are things that I am probably even decently suited to solve for? There's no amount of divine assignment, there's no amount of divine revelation absent from, us being out there and applying ourselves out in the communities where we come from, out in the world, that will enable us to discover purpose. Purpose is something that you discover in practice. It is a doing thing.
You discover purpose when you're already out there. It's not something you discover a priori and then run towards it to act. You're already out there in the world, you're tinkering, you're applying yourself in the best way possible, and it's something that you now achieve from the process of elimination by zoning into things that you're really good at. And that's the third thing. What are your skills? What are your personal passions? What are your personal abilities? What are the things that are most unique to you, that's in a bid to solve for the problems that we see and experience out in the world? We're like, there's no one else who would probably do this better than me. It could be as a result of your personal background, your personal experiences that you've had. It could be because of where you've grown up. It could be because of specific knowledge that you've had from where you've worked or your professional endeavors that makes you very well suited to solve some of these problems that you've identified. Again, it is going to be really, 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 really difficult to figure out what your purpose is without being someone who applies yourself in maybe many more ways than you need to. Because when you're young, you start with a very broad array of things. You tinker, you learn about the things you don't like. And then from that, in the process of learning about things you don't like, you necessarily, it's the other side of the coin. You learn about things you like, and that's how it works. And you start to dive into those things you like. And when you start to dive into that, you start to put in hours. And when you put in hours and that compounds over a period of years, there's probably going to be very few people who are as good as that, who are as competent as that, as you are. And even if there's so many people who are working on that, but you bring your unique flair, you bring your unique experiences, and because you're someone who knows that this is your purpose you're trying to figure out, you go at it with a significant degree of conviction. And when you have that degree of conviction, it allows you to be expressive. You express your full self. And when you combine the expression of your full self with your skills and your abilities, and you use that to attack a specific problem, there's no other person in the world who is going to attack that problem the exact way that you're doing that. And that's what makes you a person of purpose. Like, it's not that complex. It's not that complex. But one of the reasons I see, one of the ways I see many of us are being held back is we actually expect it to be ready-made for us, to be handed down to us in a vision, or we'll go up to Mount Horeb and actually have it told. It almost never happens that way for most people, right? It's not ready-made. We actually have to walk our way towards figuring out what our purpose is. It's not supposed to be easy. That's also another thing. It's not supposed to be easy. If it's easy, just be very suspicious of it. Be very suspicious of it. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we're held back. We feel a sense of lethargy because, well, if it's too hard, maybe it's not for me. But that's not always the case. That's not always the case. Ultimately, the things that yield the most significant long-term results would have a significant amount of difficulty early on. Like, that's probably one of the things we should look out for. It doesn't always happen that way, but it should be difficult. And if it's difficult, congratulations, you are well on that way. And at some point, it's not going to be as difficult as it is now. And there are many anecdotes that I'm probably even simplistic. I wouldn't want to go into to buttressing it. So, one of the places to pay attention to, and this is one of the things, Norbert Wiener also proposed in his cybernetic model of human purpose, was paying attention to our emotions. Our emotions are a wellspring and a birthplace for purpose, but we might not be paying enough attention to it. Are there things that make you feel a certain way? And I'm going to, outline some of them. Are there things that make you feel a certain way in a way that is incredibly strong? Are there people who you're envious of? That not everyone is. Like, those are probably signals of purpose that are manifesting themselves to us as emotions that sometimes we pray away, as we should, when they are negative, or, that we will away, and, it leaves us feeling guilt and shame and feeling small, but because we're not doing a good job of processing those feelings and emotions that we have. I mean, we all know this when we're at a job that maybe is even paying us well, but we know we are not supposed to be there. It is so fundamentally unaligned. And when we wake up every day, we are thoroughly unhappy. And maybe you have a volunteering thing that you're doing that pays you nothing, that you spend so much money on, and that's all you can obsessively think about. Well, you don't need a psychologist to explain that to you. There's something there you should interrogate and pay attention to, because purpose discovery can happen as a result of that feeling of frustration, of deep disgruntlement you feel on the one hand, and you're showing up at your job and you completely hate it, even if it's nothing about the job, and you have colleagues who really like it. And there's this other thing that you're drawn to, that you're effortlessly drawn to. It doesn't necessarily mean that thing is your purpose, but at least there's something that draws you in, and if you follow it and you're very diligent with the process and very honest with yourself, and you don't let your self-interest get in the way. Your self-interest is things like the need for security. So I need the money that comes from this job. The need for companionship. So I'm going to stay in this stupid relationship even if I don't need to be in it. All of those things, our self-interest almost always gets in the way. And that's why it's difficult for us to figure out purpose. And, maybe when we're 50 and really depressed and unhappy with who our lives is. So there are 4 emotional signals that you should pay attention to as it comes, to figuring purpose out. The first is righteous anger. And I choose to phrase it that way. Is there any sort of anger that is righteous? I think so. But what makes you angry? What fundamentally boils you and sets you on? I have a few friends, one of my best friends in the world, when he was 14, he really hated seeing children on the street. He was fundamentally annoyed by that concept existed. And he's 14, he has no idea of what it means to build a company or build an organization or to approach it in a way that's just lip servitude. But it really made him angry. And of course, he chose to do something about it and set up this organization that took kids off the street, built centers for them where they could actually stay, taught them active skills for them to learn and go back into society in a way that's reintegrated, and then introduce them, to the Christian faith. But what's the equivalent of that for you? What makes you angry? Do you hate when you see people bullied? Does that make you angry? We all have that if we paid enough attention. That's somewhere to pay attention to. Those are some of the emotional signals to pay attention to when it comes to figuring out what our purpose is. Maybe there's something about that that's calling you forth. Maybe there's something about that could imbue you with the long-term, stamina to solve that particular problem if you see it exist out there in the world. It also doesn't need to be grandiose. You don't need to say, it doesn't need to be climate change, because most of us don't know what to do about climate change anyways. It could be very little things, like start very small. Start very small. Do you hate it when your boss talks to you in a way that's condescending? Do you not like the way your dad talks to your mom, for example? Start with those things that make you unhappy. And it's in doing those things you actually figure out who you are. That's how we figure out who we are. It's not this exercise of, it should be ready-made and it should be handed down to me, and when I know, I'll know in a revelation. No, that process of figuring out who you are and your purpose, it lies in those micro moments, and built over time, you figure out who you are. The next thing is joy and flow. And this concept of flow is one that is very important, especially from a career perspective. But what things imbue you with joy? What things imbue you with a sense of flow? And for those of us who don't know, flow simply is, what things are you doing that makes time disappear? That makes the concept of space and time just, relegated into the background, and you're all in, you're really enjoying it. The task you have at hand is a perfect match for the skills you have, and you're going all in, and you have this desire to create the best possible version of whatever it is you're doing. What things imbue you with that state of flow? Some people, they feel that when they're writing. Some people feel that when they're playing a sport. Some people feel that when they're working out. Again, it doesn't mean you can't be simplistic and take it literally. Oh, I feel a sense of flow when I'm in the gym, so I should be a bodybuilder. That's not necessarily what you should do. But pay attention to what those are. Those are emotional signals that are very, very, very important. And honestly, I think if everyone just figured out this bit of paying attention to emotional signals and following through with them and not ignoring them, I think we would all be better positioned to figure purpose out. I honestly think so. So if there's anything you take away from today, please distribute. I beg you in the name of God. The third thing is anxiety. What makes you anxious? In what situations do you feel anxious? Are you very anxious when you have to confront somebody? Are you very anxious when you have to stand up for yourself? Are you anxious if you're in a place where people are not friendly, or hostile, or the environment is not a very specific way? What makes you anxious? Index those things. Pay attention to those things. And by anxiety, I don't mean things like, oh, stage fright. When I'm in front of a stage, I feel afraid. That's normal. Anyone can. But what are those things that peculiarly make you anxious? Pay attention to them. A lot of who you maybe could be is locked up in those things that make you anxious. Your discovery of them. And of course, when you figure out what makes you anxious, you exactly know what the opposite model is, which is things that alleviate anxiety. Places where you are when you don't feel that way. Things you're doing that do not leave you feeling anxious. Pay attention to those things. Those are probably very important emotional signals, for us to discover what our purpose is. And the fourth and final thing is our conscience. We were all created and put in this world with this beautiful thing called conscience. When we're doing something we should not be doing, our conscience tells us. When we're doing something bad, our conscience tells us. Sometimes it doesn't even need to be morally good or bad, but just something we know we should not be doing at that time. It's supposed to cost something from you. It's supposed to cost you your time. It's supposed to cost you your effort. It's supposed to cost your resources. In radical instances, it will cost you friends and family. But hopefully that's not the case. But you're going to pay a price on the altar of your purpose and figuring out what that is. So if what you want is a life of ease, if what you want is a life of happiness where you're just happy, although that's not possible, that you're just happy, like that's impossible, then maybe you don't want to waste your time pursuing the whole purpose thing. But if you're all in on the purpose thing, then you know that it's going to, and I'll need to make sacrifices for this from an effort perspective. And what it does is it imbues you with the stamina to power through difficulty. Because when it gets difficult, the first thing you're not doing is running out the door because it's gotten difficult. There's an ultimate North Star. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian Holocaust survivor, said, "He who has a why can bear anyhow." When you have a purpose, how you get there doesn't matter. No matter how rough or hard it is, it doesn't matter. Like, we've all seen images of footballers like on the pitch, like these guys are torn and they don't even realize they are bleeding. They don't feel the pain because the purpose for which they are on there, like in the ultimate scheme of things, they are kicking around, round leather. But it's way more than that for them. They are playing a game. They are playing a dynamic game. And, that game is worth the pain that biologically their bodies don't even make them feel that. If any of you has played sport like I have, you know that. Like, sometimes you hurt yourself and you don't realize until you get home, oh my God, I'm hurt. And that's exactly what purpose does for you. It invents a long-term game that you have the opportunity to play for the rest of your life. And even when it gets difficult, having purpose numbs a lot of the pain and it allows you to continue versus someone who isn't playing that game at the level at which you're playing it. And finally, purpose involves responsibility. Honestly, we need to grow up. Generally, as young people, we need to grow up. We need to get tougher. We need to become a lot more mature. There's, if we get the things we say we want, if we get the results we say we want, we don't have the stamina to actually keep it, right? So we need to put on our big boy and big girl pants if we're going to approach this question of purpose. We need to be a little less in our feelings and know that it would require us to grow up. It would require us to grow up, and that the current versions of us are not mature enough for what it is we say we want. And it's no surprise we don't have them. Because when you have the adequate level of maturity and the adequate level of responsibility for what it is you want, more often than not it would accrue to you. More often than not it would come. But when other people look at you and they can spot it from a mile away, if you're not mature, if you're not responsible, then those things you say you want, everyone knows you're not ready for it. Everyone, and they think of you as someone who is not even self-aware because everyone else knows you're not ready, but you're the only person who doesn't know. So purpose requires responsibility. It requires us to grow up. It requires us to be willing to take on burdens that we otherwise do not have to take up. That's exactly what it means. And I fundamentally believe that the world would be a much better place if everyone got more responsible. If we got more responsible and more diligent with what do we need to do? How do I need to upskill myself? How do I need to get better? Like, what are all the ways in which I fall short that I need to get better at? And if we all did that, our lives would be better individually and much better collectively.
mechanism. The anxiety bit, I am not particularly clear on that. What like anxiety is an indicator of. I don't think I got that clearly. So that was one. Second question I went to ask. When you spoke about purpose and natural ability not being intertwined, I've always believed that before you even identify purpose, the reason everybody has a different purpose is because we're all different people. We're all designed differently. Everybody has specific advantages that there's certain things I'm good at that other people are not good at, and there's certain things other people are good at that I'm not good at. And so ideally in life, you want to be on the path of I don't want to call it comfort or competence, where you have core advantages and stay away from areas where you don't have core advantages.
Yeah.
So when I think about purpose, I would ideally assume that my purpose is somewhat intertwined with the gifts I've already been given, the core advantages I have. So I know when you said the analogy on singing, you said because you're a good singer doesn't mean you should be a musician. And the way I always tend to answer that is because people say I'm a good singer. I always say like by what metric really? Like who is telling you? Your friends in your area, or like have you competed on the global stage and found out you're really really good at that level? So maybe the second question is, maybe my mind thought the answer is no, but I'll just ask it anyway. But is it possible for purpose to become, like for you to have a purpose that is completely distinct from something you're gifted at?
Is it possible? Absolutely. To have a purpose that's completely distinct from something you're gifted at. It's very possible to, and you say gifted at, gifts are things that we can develop on our own over time. It's sometimes they're skills. For example, even singing that many people tend to assume you're born a good or bad singer. That's not true. Like you can work on becoming a good singer. You can program someone from when they're young to be good singers, and when they're older, they're actually really good singers. But you're even stronger if your natural abilities have an intersection with your line of purpose. A practical example, I met this lady a few weeks ago, and she's global head of HR at one of the big Nigerian banks and recently retired. And she came to the last public lecture series, and so some of you might have seen or heard her. And she told me that now that she finally retired, she now wants to start to pursue what she thinks she's always wanted to do with her life. She worked in HR, was really good at it, is very, very nurturing. She says she had the phone numbers of the parents of most people who worked with her on speed dial. When they come into her office, she's asking them, have you called your parents? She's really good at her job. And of course, that natural tendency to be very nurturing, to look out for other people, to put herself second and others first, made her excel at her job and do very well at it. But working in the context of a bank, it's like she's always wanted to, right from when she was really young, inspired by her experience of losing her mom at 16. She's wanted to build a care home for older women. Like she's had a burden for mothers right from when she was really young. And it's now, I don't know how old she is, but she's retired now, so I guess above 60. And she's only now trying to get started with doing that, and wanted support with advice for how to set up an NGO and things in that sense. So for her, if you asked her, she has done a really good job, and no one can hold her against it. Like she's done a really, really good job with her career and her life so far. But if you ask her, she has not fulfilled her purpose. And she wants to now begin that journey of fulfilling her purpose. And the reason why that's relevant to your question is, it's an intersection of, yes, this is a burden she's had, she's nurturing. She was able to deploy that in her work, but not in a way that allowed her to fulfill the purpose for which she was supposed to. Maybe as she has discovered, and if someone in their 60s says, I know my purpose, I've always known it, you should believe them. Right, that her purpose is for mothers and older people and getting parents to feel a sense of love and care in their old age. She seems to be really angry about the fact that when children get older and their parents are much older, children abandon their parents to nannies, for example, to care for them. And it feels very transactional. She doesn't like that. So who is she called to? Maybe she's called to the elderly. But that skill, that natural ability she had, she has deployed it in a completely different context all her life. So it's usually best when there's an intersection of both, And I think we tend to see that, but I absolutely think it's also possible that your natural skill sets, things that come easy to you, are also different from your line of purpose, and you will now have to go and build those skills again. But after a while, you would have them, they'll become natural to you for you to excel at your purpose anyways. And the first point on anxiety, it's very simple and similar to, think of it as an opposite to the joy flow, state where you're triggered, your anxiety is triggered by certain environments, maybe certain type of work, certain type of conversations. And maybe that's usually an indicator of one or two things. There's something there that you're afraid of and you need to stare into that abyss. And maybe in staring into that abyss, there's part of you that's locked in there that you'll figure out. Or those are things you should stay as far from, as far as possible as you can from. So it's one of two things, but it requires some sort of confrontation. And the confrontation starts from acknowledgement that I'm really anxious about these things. I'm not pretending it away. I'm not pretending it away, through feelings of shame and guilt, or maybe I'm weak and that's why I feel anxious and no one else feels this way. But acknowledging that it exists and then interrogating why it exists. But usually there's almost something to learn from anxiety. There's almost always something to learn from anxiety. We're either running away from something when we feel anxious that we should be running towards, or that's just danger that we should stay the hell away from. So that's what I mean when I say that's an emotional signal to pay attention to. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's come here.
So my question is, do you think it's possible for people to discover their purpose in its entirety? And I'll use you as an example. When you answered the question about your purpose, you first spoke about young people, but then after speaking about young people, you mentioned young men. And it's like, it's still in the same kind of, still following the same bigger picture,
Yeah.
but it's changing. So is it possible for somebody to know their purpose in its entirety, or they just need that bigger picture and then whatever comes along, they just make sure it aligns with that bigger picture?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I don't think so. That's why it's always good to start from a problem statement. When you're trying to solve a problem scientifically, you start from a problem statement, then you go and you come up with a thesis and then a hypothesis for what the solution is, and ultimately becomes theory when it proves to be successful. Right? So similarly, when we're embarking on the journey of trying to figure out what our purpose is, we have to start from a problem statement in some sense. What imbues you with righteous anger? What situations do you encounter that that make you feel terribly angry and viscerally angry, that that should not exist? It doesn't necessarily mean that is your purpose in and of itself, but there's some aspect of you that could be deployed towards solving that problem, and in doing that you figure out what your purpose is. So your purpose is, you think of it incrementally. We almost never know how big our lives or our purpose could get. Like if we knew that from day one, we probably weren't thinking ambitiously enough, and it's way bigger than that. But when you start small, it's normal for your understanding of what your purpose is to be limited. It's easy for you to think about it as, I just want to solve this very local, specific instance of this problem. But over time it grows. The example I gave was, if you walk in an office and someone is being terribly bullied by their manager, and an articulation of purpose is, I'm really angry with this. Of course you wouldn't say the reason why I was created on earth was to solve the problem between two colleagues, right? But that's an indication. When you start there, then you realize, I learned something from solving this specific instance. I learned what it means to stand up to a bully. I learned what it means to speak up for someone who probably did not have the voice or status to speak up. When you solve that problem, it's almost unlikely that you'll stop there. And when you do that, I think the euphoria or the confidence that you've gained from doing that now leaves you in a position where you're asking, okay, what grander instance of this problem can I solve? And you start to get grander. And before you know it, that's how people build movements around, say, anti-bullying as an example, to continue with that example. So we always start with some sort of local instance, but even when it gets really big, the problem you were solving hasn't really changed. You're just solving it at a much more grander scale that you didn't anticipate it would get to when you started working on it. So I don't think you know what, if you tell me, oh, I know what my entire purpose is, except it was divinely revealed to you, and you're like Moses, but even at that, I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Thank you. I have two questions. Number one is, can you please throw more light on the role failure or uncertainty play in discovering one's purpose? And what strategies have helped you stay aligned with your purpose, especially during these challenging times?
Of course, failure is very important. One of the rookie mistakes we make in the process of discovering what our purpose is, and we never really start out to, oh, I want to discover what my purpose is, so let me take these steps. But it's by doing things. But, stay with me. One of the rookie mistakes we make is we aim at too many things. And if we think of purpose as an aim, as meaning that we aspire towards, then what that means is if we have too many things that we're aspiring towards, that's just as bad as us having nothing that we're aspiring towards. So definitely one of the mistakes that I've made is, in many instances, pursuing things, spreading myself thin and pursuing things that I should not be pursuing. And what have the failure of those things taught me? Well, it's taught me, it's further narrowed the scope of what my purpose is. Because I think when you know what is not your purpose, that's one less thing. It brings you closer, like it reduces the parameters for the surface area for where your purpose would ultimately play. And I think that's probably been the most significant thing, that failures, like the different, very many failures that I've experienced in my life, micro and macro failures, has helped me understand. It's helped me, one, learn about myself. It's helped me learn not great things about myself. In what areas am I indisciplined? In what areas do I run away from difficulty? In what areas am I weak? Like all of those things you learn, and if you're honest, you learn those lessons, and you also open yourself up to other people who know you and who you trust to tell you those things. But at the same time, you also learn what you're really good at. You learn the things you're really good at, and then you can take those things, put them side by side, and when you go out again to do whatever it is you want to do, whether it's that same thing or differently, you have a better hang of how to not fail too foolishly. So you go on to learn new mistakes. You make new mistakes, you learn new learnings, and that's very instructive for your purpose ultimately. Yeah.
Okay, so my question is this. So in understanding and finding your purpose is actually very similar to his question. How do you differentiate between the resistance and discomfort that comes with finding your purpose, and also like the resistance and discomfort that comes with, this is not the path that I should be on? Like, how do you differentiate with that?
God, it's a great question. It's also a very hard one. It's one of those ones where I like to say, but it's not that simple. And that's why relying on conscience is something that's incredibly powerful. The times when I've taken the steps that I should not have taken, a part of me knew. A part of me kind of knew. And it's one of those things where over time you learn to trust your conscience a lot more. And just not do the things that, when it tells you not to do. But also, everyone who is playing within the parameters of their purpose will tell you this, that it's difficult, but it's also easy. It is incredibly possible. You're likelier to be economically prosperous when you're functioning within your center of purpose. And what does that mean? It means when your heart there's almost nothing that you choose to do that you would not have, that if you're all in and you're really good at it, that the resources to take care of would not make themselves manifest. There's capital flowing around the world. And if you ask any, for example, investor, they tell you we have more money than we have credible entrepreneurs. Is that true? Absolutely. So, and even if you decide to not be an entrepreneur, if you decide to pursue a job like paid employment, why can't you pursue paid employment in an area that aligns with what you think you want to do with your life? And maybe sometimes maybe we don't feel like we're good enough for it, then maybe that's a call for us to get better and to upskill. The reason why I'm saying this is there's no way we live our lives to our old age and we spend it paying the bills that will receive any sort of fulfillment. It's a meaningless life. There's no one I know. And I like old people and I like to talk to them, and for some reason they like me and they like to have me around them. There's no older person who I know is in their 60s who thinks about, oh my God, I spent all this time pursuing the bills and money to send my children to school, no matter how noble that is, that feels a sense of fulfillment. They still feel like they've done nothing meaningful with their lives in that sense. And it should not have been so. And sometimes we tell ourselves these things, oh my God, let's just focus on paying the bills. Like, Jesus, okay, let's assume bills are paid. Let's assume that so that you can pay your rent, you can pay your transport, you can eat, you can send your children to school. What else are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do? Seriously. What are you going to spend your time working on? We also have this false sense of benevolence that, if only I had this level of wealth, then I'll be able to allocate, but that's not true. That's not true. People aren't as wealthy as you think they are when they start to do things. People aren't as genuinely, and people aren't as wealthy as you think they are. Like, many of you are much more well off, even in the little that we have, than people who are out there doing things. But in the place of assignment, and I don't want to sound religious about this, in the place of assignment, the resources will almost always meet you there. And how much do you even think you'll be able to save, between when you're 20 and when you're 60, that you would have enough reserve to now finally go out and do what you want to do? Like, it's not true, it's false. You would never have enough money to start anything. You would never have enough money on day one. It's when you start it, and you're doing a good job of it, and you're someone who is competent and people trust you and you're credible and you have good character and people can vouch for you, then the resources to actually do those things will come. So I want to disabuse our minds of we have to choose between, I understand that sometimes we have to make practical concessions. I hate this job, but no other jobs are coming my way. I need to take this job to pay my bills. Absolutely, do that. We need to do that. But the idea that we adopt that as a long-term posture, okay, provided my bills are taken care of, but we have to be careful though, it's a slippery slope, right? Especially if you're in a place where there's nothing worse than being successful at something that's not your purpose. Golden handcuffs, you wear golden handcuffs for the rest of your life. It's not prestigious at all. It's not prestigious. So let's disabuse ourselves of I'm going to work to pay my bills. Yeah, no, that's not the way, that's not the mental model with which we should live life in any way, shape, or form. I am not saying this as someone privileged. I'm genuinely not saying this as someone privileged. And some of you here know me, but it is, there's no other way to live our life but with our North Star in mind. We might not know what it is, but if we have that front and center, everything else will align. We'll keep chasing. Everyone I know 10 years ago who told me I'm hustling, if I call them today, they are still hustling. They will never stop hustling. That's not a productive way to live life, please. We could be more. And what's even funny is, even if you want to think about it selfishly, the chances that you'll be way wealthier exist in your line of purpose. If you're doing what you feel, the chances that you'll be way wealthier, things will come to you effortlessly. Like I said earlier, there's nobody who gets wealthy, by thinking this way. There's no one who gets wealthy by exchanging their time. You can earn enough to pay your bills, but you'll never even earn enough to start that business so that's not how we build long-term wealth. I wish you guys all the wealth and success in the world, but in your line of purpose. God bless you. All right. I'll pass the mic to the elder.